Hello and welcome to the Voice Sector podcast. Today I'm here with Saskia once again, and we're talking about Black Lives Matter in the arts and whether things have actually really changed. So, how are you doing today, Saskia?
I'm good, thanks, Tara. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Weather muggy, but
Mm.
it is. Yep, that's how it is, I guess.
Typical.
Britain continues to be Britain.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll fill in with some kind of general context to get us going. So George Floyd was killed on May 25th. From the time this podcast comes out, is 2.5 to 3 months.
Yeah.
Since then, there's been a resurgence of the already existing Black Lives Matter movement into the public eye, at least, and this movement kind of broadened out beyond just specifically police violence and police killings and
Hmm.
move more broadly into talking about the ways in which a lot of the structures in society are racist and a lot of the systems in society are racist. There's just been a lot of discussions across things. And now, as kind of the immediate media hubbub has kind of cooled off, we're going to be looking at what's left and whether people have committed to those diversity things that they said they would do, and like whether the black squares have been followed up with actual action.
Those infamous black squares. I think, especially since May, there's been so much that's gone on, and so not even so much that's gone on, but so much that's been promised. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how, even obviously, it's not so easy to just bring policies in and have them, change overnight, but whether those movements have actually been made to actually, make for a better future.
And I think there's a lot of different spheres which is with this is being talked about. So, for example, one of them is in the media, and one specific example which has come up recently is on the BBC, where the N word in its entirety was used on daytime television twice in a week, which got a lot of people
Mm.
incensed about the way in which, on the one hand, we're talking about this anti-racism, and on the other hand, you're saying a word which is deeply triggering to a lot of black people for no real I mean, there's not really a good reason for BBC to have someone saying it, but for
Yeah.
no good reason. And the two people saying it were both white, and it was like, why?
It's just so bizarre because this isn't some. I don't know the last time that there was one of these incidents where that word was said and it didn't get bleeped out, whether it was, on a live performance or something like that. It's been a long time. So to have two white women in the space of a week say it for what the BBC have classed as, acceptable reasons, shall we, allegedly, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And I completely understand why everybody is outraged and everybody's angry and they're just. But I think the first feeling, I know for me especially, was just confusion. Like, why now of all times, and why is it not like the two journalists who actually dropped the N word are the ones to apologize, and the BBC have said nothing.
Yeah, it's like it's so weird that the BBC, which won't allow anyone to swear, won't allow anyone to do any of that because they're meant to be like professional or whatever, is like, oh yeah, but we can say this word. It's fine. As if it doesn't have masses of history and present and etc. and meaning.
Exactly, and the fact that it happened twice in 1 week, like, what does that mean for the movement itself and for looking at the racism in journalism and in institutions like the BBC? It feels like it's very much we've promised to look into it and go, 2, 3 steps forward, but we're really not going anywhere, and we're just gonna do whatever we see fit and decide to address it when we decide to address it.
Yeah, and like in terms of, it's almost like indicative of how things haven't changed because at the end of the day, the media is still 94% white, which is disappointing to the nation, which is 85% white, which is even worse when you consider the fact that these media institutions are like in London, in central London,
Yeah.
which and London is 40% BAME. So it's like, what's going on here? And you can see that in what's happening in the way that they're basically dropping the N word and just being like, "Lol, deal with it."
Yeah, it's like this isn't some small town in, Cornwall or Yorkshire or somewhere like that. Like, this is central London. And the fact that we know that these scripts that these journalists have to read go through so many different people's hands, but the reason why it wasn't flagged is because all of those hands that it goes through are white hands.
Yeah, exactly. And they're like, oh well, it's in context. It's like no, you could have just said M word.
Yeah,
Everyone gets what you mean.
it's not. It's just it's very confusing, and I'm really nervous as to see how what the future's gonna. Not even the distant future, but the near future. Like, what else is gonna
Yeah,
happen? Like, what next?
because that seems like a very significant thing for them to just break.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's
Yeah.
concerning to say the least. But yeah, that's an example of the media. We'll come back to a bit more on media soon, but now we're going to move on to the arts more holistically. So one of the first things that's been happening is that people have been pushing arts institutions to actually release their figures. This was a specific one of a hashtag pull up or shut up, which
Mm-hmm.
is basically telling, I think it's primarily theatres, but also arts institutions, to release the diversity figures for their staff so that we can have actual conversations rather than kind of being really opaque about it and us not knowing what the actual situation is. And some institutions have released it. I think the Young Vic and the Old Vic released theirs. The Old Vic's one was very bad.
I can imagine.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, they had like no black people in senior management, and the mess, and it was really messy as well because their data was like really incomplete. I think only like 50% of staff actually took it or something like that, and it just was a whole mess. Um, but it also shows the way that's also telling the way in which these theatres and stuff haven't been thinking about it. They've just been like, oh, we'll just like do like a survey that only like 50% of the stuff will take, and sure, we'll just leave it at that. But
Yeah, it's
that's in like,
almost like
yeah,
making inclusion and diversity optional. I think
yeah,
that's the message it kind of, puts across.
very much so, I think. And yeah, so that's in one example of the ways in which this sort of thing has affected theatre. And it's very telling that a lot of institutions have just stayed quiet.
Yeah.
Like, as much as the old Vic got lambasted for putting out their figures, at least they put out figures.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many institutions, like big name institutions, that just haven't released figures at all. And you're like, are we not gonna do anything? Because you guys all did make anti-racism commitments. I read most of those anti-racism commitments that you alleged that you made.
Mm-hmm.
So
So I know that you can hear me right now, like you know that you can see this, but the silence throughout this whole time has been the most telling thing. I know that even outside of the arts institutions, just on social media, whether it's somebody who is affiliated with the black community or whatever, it's everybody's silence that people are questioning and looking at the most.
mhm.
And that hasn't been a secret. So for them to just not put anything up, even if it does make them look bad, it's almost like you brave that negativity for putting out these figures that are predominantly white and then make a call for action to actually do something about it. But I I guess the ones who haven't put out any numbers, they're not willing to make that commitment to change. And they also don't want the scrutiny for it either.
I think even when you're not an institution, when you're a person, a huge part of accountability is saying, this is where I've gone wrong, this is where I'm at, this is where I need to be. Like, we can't have those conversations. We can't hold people accountable. We can't decide where we're going to go if you're being really opaque about your data and about, like, what you're doing or not doing.
Mm. It's clearly just not a conversation that they're willing to have.
Yeah, and it just is like, so all this was, not all of this, obviously, but all this doing whatever on social media was just for nothing because you don't actually care. You just
Yeah, but they don't want to. It's like they don't want to come across like they don't care, and it's so easy to post a black square. That's why there were so many people, like not even just there were black people as well who were in two minds about posting it because it's just not enough, and that shouldn't really be something that you'd even have to question. Like, obviously, posting this black square is not going to be enough, but it's just a little nod to I'm committed to learning more about this. Like, there were so many brands who were like, oh, we don't know enough yet, but we're gonna do this, we're gonna go away, we're gonna think about it, and only time will tell or not whether they do. But even normalizing saying that you don't know enough about something is something that is lacking
yeah,
and would have been more appreciated than just their silence on the matter at all.
yeah, I definitely. I wish there was just more transparency, because you're right. People would be so much kinder to you if you actually were saying you were going to make an effort, as opposed to just kind of being indignant. And we'll get more onto being indignant instead of making an effort later.
Mm.
We'll come to that. Yeah. Another thing we were talking about, or that I think is important to talk about here, is that especially on social media, there were a lot of call outs and like people saying we're going to mentor you and whatever in the wake of this, because they essentially, people realized that their circles were starkly white,
Mm.
and that they actually needed to be proactive if they wanted black and other minority people to be involved in their industries. So there's been lots of call outs and opportunities that went out in the first like few weeks, and it's been interesting to see where those have gone and where those haven't. So Saskia, if you want to add anything there.
Yeah, like I completely support the whole call out thing, because it's one of those situations where if you know that your circle is predominantly white and your this call out is to like counteract that, there's not really a more classy way to do it. So I get the intention behind it. It's kind of like, I'm aware of this and I want to change this. So as long as the person who is, doing the call out is actually willing to make those changes and actually listen to their black intern or mentoree or whatever the word, what's the word when you're not the mentor but you're the person being
Mentee.
mentored. Mentee. Why did I say mentoring? Anyway, mentee, whatever. But my issue is that I've seen a couple of call outs for interns who are BAME only, and I don't think that they're expecting the response that they actually got, because one of the like common responses seems to be, oh, we've been overwhelmed with all of these applicants or all of these people coming forward and we're sorry, but it's going to take us longer than we expected. And I think it just really goes to show how much white people, not even just white people, but these institutions think that the reason why they don't have black people in their institution is because they're not interested, as opposed to them not actually being able to get a foot in the door.
Yeah.
And this is really kind of opening their eyes to that. And I don't think a lot of them know how to handle it. It's like walking around in a bubble, but you don't know that you're in a bubble until someone comes along and pops it, and then you're like, oh my God, there's so much air out here. Like, what the hell's going on? So it's a hard one, but I don't know. I just hope it's the how can I put this? I I hope that they go beyond the temporary internship or the temporary like mentor program and start to really look at how much black people need to be ingrained in the actual fabric of that institution, and not just as a passing fancy.
Yeah, and I think the thing you could definitely see, like we were talking about before, was you can tell the people who have put thought into it and who know what they're doing, and the
Mm,
ones who have just kind of said it. Because like there's people like Nika Shukla, and I think it's the Good Literacy Agency, I think that's what they're called,
yeah.
where they've been doing this sort of work for a while. They know that it's difficult. They know what it actually entails, and they actually are actually like working in a way that works for people, as opposed to just being like, oh, well, just put a thing out and they'll like DM me, and it's like you have to understand that you have to actually put in the work to figure out how to do this thing properly. You can't just kind of do it on a whim, and you can't also, another thing is that you can't invite people of color or other marginalized people into spaces which are unsafe for them, like,
Yeah.
because there are certain institutions which are very hostile towards like people of color, and
Mm,
it's like, if even if you put a call out and people know they're hostile, we're not on everyone's kind of hip to it. So if you put this out, you're basically going to invite someone into an environment which is extremely hostile for them. So unless you do the work to actually improve the environment and the culture, etc., of the institution, which a lot of these people aren't willing to do, then you're just inviting them in to essentially suffer for however long they're there, and you just end up with loads of burnout. Like there's lots of industries which basically for this being one of many reasons, but for this reason have a lot of burnout, particularly of women, particularly of women of color, etc. Because essentially it is just so exhausting to be in that industry consistently because it is such an unsafe space for them to exist.
And I think part of that is everything now is so, like, everybody wants some, because racism is not something that just happened last week or on May 25th when, George Floyd was killed. It's not something, people are tired, and this is something that people have been carrying around with them for a very long time. So I think some institutions who are trying to make the effort, I say, in inverted commas, whatever, to change the scene, are looking for quick fixes because that's what they think that we as black people are looking for. And I can't speak for every other black person, but I know that I would personally prefer it if these organizations went away for 6 months to a year to really tear down the walls that they built and then rebuild them back up from from the ground up with us involved. I'd much appreciate that than just this quick fix internship that's going to like you said, result in burnout or bring me into this hostile situation where, okay, it's great, I've got a foot in the door, but what's the point of getting your foot in the door in a house that's on fire? Like, it's true. Like, don't bring me in here just to burn, or, it's, you have to change the environment. You have to change everything that is wrong with your institution. Otherwise, I'm just going to be like almost like a cow to slaughter. Like, there's after me, there's going to be another one, and it's not going to change. The outcome will always be the same.
Yeah, exactly. So we're gonna come with a few like examples of this sort of thing that we can talk about to kind of almost move it out the abstract into the specific. One of these is the Tate Britain. In terms of, so we're talking about arts institutions and stuff like that in relation to BLM. Is that the Tate Britain? Basically, they had in their basement. There's like a restaurant um, where they had a mural from 1927
Mm.
that was and this room is described as the most amusing room in Europe.
Oh
And
boy.
they, yeah, their wall had a mural which had a bunch of like, oh, people like in horses and carriages, but then a bunch of them were dragging slaves. And up till
Child
this,
slaves.
yeah, child slaves. To this day, like, that is the Rex Whistler restaurant has that mural there. No one has ever thought to do any, or no, like, well, no one at the Tate has ever done anything about it, has ever even changed the description. Like, they didn't even do the, like, the very, quick and easy, oh, these don't represent our current values, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Like, they didn't even do that. And,
And
yeah.
this is what I mean by tearing it down and starting from the beginning. Because if you, I mean, the Tate is a well respected institution all over the world. Like, to have something like that, I mean, to have it in the basement as well, I think is quite like ironic as well. Um, but you know, how can you sit there and, oh, we're anti-racist, we're gonna put all of these, like, in our mission statement, in our ethos, our values, blah blah blah, and then have something as horrible as that in your basement? Like, it's, you know what I mean? It's just
Yeah.
ridiculous.
And it's like, they've removed, what they've done now is they've removed the description, because the description used to read, um, the, what did it used to read? Something about being like basically the most amusing room in Europe. Um, and that's all well and good to remove that description and to kind of change it to be like to give more context. But even then, you're like, hmm, this still feels icky. Like, I'm not sure if this is the sort of thing where you can just be like, oh, here's the context now. It's fine now.
Yeah, I don't think adding context or removing the description makes the slightest bit of difference, because this is in their restaurant. It's not like it's in a gallery where you're displaying the artist's work and that artist just happened to be really problematic, and this is a place where people come to eat and to relax and dine. And if you're basking in that ambiance and that's what's on the wall, it just says a lot more than just, oh yeah, we've taken the like we've taken the description down, and it doesn't change the context.
Yeah. And also the thing again with this specific one is this is not like, oh, it's a mural that's been there since 1780 whatever when slavery was still a thing. This
Mm,
mural was painted in the 1920s. Slavery had been over in mainland Britain for over 100 years, in the
mm,
colonies for nearly 100 years. There is This is long after slavery, so there
yeah,
is no that thing has been there for less than a century. There is no reason for you. There's no context in which that ever makes sense, except
exactly.
if you're intending to be deeply racist and cruel, because you could so easily have a little mural with a bunch of like horses and whatever in your high class restaurant without having black slave children just for fun. Like I don't understand why they're there.
Yeah, I mean, English, old England, they love to commemorate that what they call a simpler time, them with their white wigs on and all their outfits and the horses, whatever. Why put the black slave children in there? Why? Like you said, it's 1927 when this painting was made. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And it speaks to their character and it speaks to, the kind of things that they value and the kind of things that they don't.
I think in a way this mural is maybe the most British racism in the sense that it's there and we're just going to pretend it's not there and we're just going to chill and we're going to do our thing and we're going to just like enjoy ourselves. We're going to pretend this racism isn't there and ignore how this affects the people that it directly affects and just be like, oh, it's just there, it's just part of our history, it's just there. And like, it's a very specifically British thing to be like, to have this vile racist thing there and just kind of ignore it, or at least ignore the racism of it, and just be
I
like, oh, that's just an amusing room. It's just weird, not deeply violent.
Yeah, I completely agree with you because that's literally how, racism is in Britain. It's like, oh, like we all know it's there, but we don't like to talk about it. And if you call us out on it, especially in the media, we're going to deny it and say that Britain welcomes everyone. Um, you know, we, it's just, oh my God, I just can't even, like, it's just too much. It's too much.
Yeah. um. Yeah. So, that was, by the way, that was only really initially brought up like in the past like month or so by this arts criticism website called the White Pube. They're a good follow on Instagram and read anyway. Very silly name, but yeah,
Yeah.
that only became a thing after they started talking about it on social media like a month ago. Bearing in mind that thing has been there for nearly 100 years.
Yeah,
Um,
and can I just quickly add to that? Brace yourself because how many more things like that are there now, while we're having this conversation, that people aren't even aware of until somebody, comes along, takes a picture of it, and then puts it on Instagram. Like,
yeah.
it's an ongoing battle.
Can you imagine? Like, I know this is a bit of a diversion, but can you imagine? Like, you're going to the Tate. Oh, someone invites you down to have like a dinner there, and you just look and you're seeing black children enslaved. Like, imagine like us
Honestly,
as black people if someone invited us down there and we saw that. Like,
I don't know how I'd react. I can't even say that I don't know. I really don't know how I'd react. I'd probably have to look twice. I'd probably think I was imagining it because even
yeah,
though I know how racist Britain is, like, I just not so blatant. I just wouldn't.
mhm.
I'd just be
It
gobsmacked.
would be hard to process. You'd
It
be like,
really would.
what?
But it's funny because on their Instagram page, if you swipe to the next couple pictures, there's just a group of white diners laughing, enjoying their dinner, enjoying their tea or whatever it is that they're eating and drinking, and the picture's just in the background, and I'm just like, how? No one's even acknowledging it.
Yeah, yeah.
And this
It's
is
so weird.
it's so weird, and I can't tell. I don't know if I'd be happier if it was something that people went out of their way to go to this place for. I know that sounds a little bit like, what is she talking about? But it's not even like, they're not even acknowledging it. I don't know why that
Yeah,
bothers
yeah, I
me
get
so
what you mean.
much. Do you know what I
It
mean?
is it's so insidious to be like, because that means it's accepted as normal. Because if it was like, oh, this is a whole, this is a racist artifact that is like kind of everyone makes a
Known
show of it, and
exhibition.
yeah,
Yeah.
because it's like what you said before. The way this is treated, there are probably other places which have similar stuff
Mm.
because there is no, and obviously like there are probably been people who have kicked up a stir about this before, but there's been no big public outcry around things like this.
Yeah.
So there's no way this is the only one. There are definitely other dining halls and exclusive places. This one isn't that exclusive, but you know what I mean. That kind
Yeah.
of place, which just has this casually extreme. I mean, because it's like there's a lot of stuff. There was, I can't remember specifically, but there was this like symbol, um, which was used as like an honor that basically showed like a white angel like killing or whatevering a black demon, like a demon which is specifically shown as being a black person, like a black African person.
Great.
And like there's so many of these things which are just left unsaid, or at
Yeah.
least left unsaid by white people, and you're like, look, it's right there, it's right there. How did you not notice this? Why did it take George Floyd dying for you to notice this? Like,
Exactly. I mean, I get what you're saying. It's exactly kind of the same with the rugby song. I'm not a rugby fan, but I read that the song, what's the one that they sing? I've completely forgotten it. But
swing low, sweet chariot.
yes, and all the racist implications with that song. It's the same as, us walking through Bristol or Trafalgar Square or whatever and walking past these statues of people.
Plantation something. There's a plantation something in central London. I can't remember. It's called Plantation Square or something.
Yeah, it's exactly the same as that people consider as normal. And it's not like you go there specifically for that. And that's even worse because it's normalized. It's part of your everyday. Like, they wouldn't miss it if it was gone, but then they still made no moves to move it because
Yeah,
it doesn't affect them in the same way that it affects us. And
that is
it's just,
scary. Yeah. So speaking of another institution, which is the last one we're going to talk about today, is the South Bank Centre. So the South Bank Centre has had is doing a lot of redundancies and is trying to reshape how it is because of the financial issues caused by COVID-19, and some people would argue issues that have been within the South Bank Centre for a longer time than that. So recently there was a petition and an open letter called Save Our South Bank. You can find it literally on saveoursouthbank.com, and there have been a bunch of protests outside the South Bank to do with this, which is basically accused the South Bank of not being managed well and accused them of being incredibly unimaginative in finding their solutions for the amount of money they've lost.
mm,
And it's basically saying that they need to do better and they need to actually find a more create. Someone said literally, this is not a very creative solution from an arts center. Like they, because they basically their response was according to the Save Our South Bank. They said that basically one of the things which have been floated was to cut down their cut down their what they're doing as an art center to basically be 10% internal art stuff and 90% reserved for rental. Um,
ridiculous.
which is like, you're an art center. That seems ludicrous.
Mm,
And they're gonna apparently, according to again the same letter, going to act like a startup in a sense, which is just a very weird way to approach it, and it's a very like business-minded way to approach an arts institution, which doesn't make sense. But it just also, you can read the full letter for the full context. But the allegations against them seem like they're going in a direction which is really detrimental. Um, but
yeah.
more specifically as to how this relates to Black Lives Matter is that within that letter, there were claims which were related to them and Black Lives Matter. So the first one was that the South Bank needs to adhere to its anti-racism statement by actively protecting the diversity of its workforce. Senior management have chosen to proceed with their program of redundancies without taking into account the disproportionate impact on BAME staff. Because a lot of the staff getting redundancies from South Bank, from a bunch of other places, are lower down in the hierarchy of the institution, and that usually is disproportionately BAME.
Mm-hmm.
That is obviously seen as a problem
Yeah.
if they're talking about being anti-racist. And Saskia, if you want to give me any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things, isn't it? Where I mean, when they hire BAME staff and they're in, those sorry, they're in those kind of roles that tend to be the most dispensable when, budget cuts need to be made, to not consider the two of them together and think, okay, instead of coming at it from a business angle and not really coming at it from a way that's like, okay, how can we, balance these numbers almost? How can we do what we need to do in terms of like business and finance wise, but also stick to what we claim to be our anti-racism kind of ethos? Like, it's just typical to me. Like, it's not surprising at all.
Yeah, and this isn't just like a South Bank thing. This is a lot of institutions. It
Yeah.
feels like the first, because we can take this to journalism, for example. A lot of people of color and other marginalized people who work in journalism do not have staff roles. So whenever a website, the first thing to go from a website is a freelance budget, always,
Mm-hmm.
almost always. From a publication, the first thing to go is a freelance budget.
Yeah.
And so that always means that people of color, other marginalized people have way less opportunities
Mm-hmm.
immediately, straight out, because of the way that these institutions are fundamentally structured, so that people of color are the most dispensable.
And that's the thing, like, if there were more like black people, Asian people, whatever, in these staff roles, there wouldn't, like, the numbers wouldn't be so disproportionate. But it's not something, I don't know, I don't even know why. It's just not something that seems to occur to them. And then, when people are making these claims and then their responses are so, you can just see their responses are so uninformed. Like,
Yeah, like the response to this first claim was the South Bank Centre absolutely stands by its anti-racism statement and will continue the ongoing discussions with the BAME staff network to create a powerful diversity and equality action plan. Our redundancy program will be subject to an equality impact assessment. We will rebuild our organisation in the future with diversity and equality absolutely central to our recovery.
I believe it when I see it.
it's very, it's very like, it just all feels very loose.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, we love diversity, guys. We're not going to give you any specific numbers or anything like that, but we just love it.
Yeah, it's like so
And
amazing.
like, they already talked in that SOS list. They talked about how, according to some statistics, the South Bank Centre is 20% BAME when London is 40%. And Lambeth, which the South Bank Centre is in, is 48% BAME. So like, what's going on? So it just seems very, it's very whatever to be like, oh yeah, we're anti-racist, but actually we don't hire people of color at all.
Yeah, especially not in a staff role. Like, that's asking
Yeah.
too much,
Or
clearly.
we'll bring you on front of house, or we'll bring you on a 0 hour contract, but we won't give you a like salaried role.
Yeah, and then, when we need to make cuts, you're the first to go. Sorry.
Yeah, they have the least secure contracts, while CEOs are racking up. Or not CEOs, I can't remember what the actual titles are in terms of institutions, but they're like directors and the bigwigs are
Yeah,
earning ridiculous amounts of money, and all these freelance, all these front of house staff, and all the people who are like have really vulnerable contracts are basically just gone. And those are disproportionately working class, disproportionately disabled, disproportionately, etc. You get the idea.
yeah. And they get away with it as well, because I think when we look at, racism and what it really means, especially, like, it's very one dimensional. And they kind of hang on to stuff like what, like we were talking about earlier off podcast. Sorry, guys, about BAME itself, and they'll have, I don't know, two people from Asia, somewhere in Asia, maybe China, maybe Japan, whatever, and that will be their quota for like all BAME, and they don't feel the need to hire any like black people or Asian people, like other Asian people, because they have those numbers.
Yeah,
And they won't see that as racist though. That's not discrimination to them. That's not racism to them. That's just like another day at the office almost.
yeah,
And so when stuff like this happens and they're like, oh no, like we haven't, and if you read their anti-racism statement, they probably in their own eyes, because of the way it's worded, haven't broken any, of those rules that they've listed. But that's simply because of the way it's written and because it's always going to be in favor of everybody else instead of
yeah.
everybody else. If that makes
I think there's another. Yeah, I get you. There's another telling thing with the South Bank Centre one. So there was another claim. Efforts to address structural racism and respond to the crisis of underrepresentation have been met by disturbing instances of racism, including one in which a board member stated she did not believe in victimhood and asked them if they were proud to be people of colour and proud to work at the South Bank Centre. So those are obviously very loaded questions and statements. And for an
Yeah.
institution which claims to care about anti-racism, it's very weird to have a director saying that they didn't believe in victimhood. Um, so the response is even more telling. Um,
Yeah, I think you should read
yeah,
that out.
the response is, we think it misleading not to make it clear that the board member who made these comments in the context of an internal discussion between the BAME network and the executive team is herself a woman of colour. 25% of our board are people of colour, and we continue to seek this to increase this percentage as we recruit new members.
I think it's important to say that by people of color, they mean like, oh, one part Lithuanian or two parts, I don't know, Italian. They're really not talking. There is no way they're talking about like a dark skinned woman here, a dark skinned black woman. There's no way.
Yeah, even if they were, which the wording is very loose, so I doubt it. Even if they were, hypothetically, because obviously we don't know who this person is
Mm,
and who the person's allegations are about, it doesn't matter. Like, if if the one black person you have at your company, not the one, but is saying is saying things which go against your alleged anti-racism, you can't use them to deflect. You can't just be like, what sort of anti-racist are you if whenever you're accused of racism, you go, oh, see, we have black people, or see, see, I have black people, see, we have people of color. Like, the
yeah,
thing she said about not believing in victimhood, it doesn't matter if it's a person of color or not a person of color saying it. That still is a deep problem and deeply an issue which you need to address. You cannot just be like, oh, we have people of color, so clearly anything a person of color says on racism is fine, even when every other person of color in the institution disagrees with them. Like,
exactly. It's almost like, oh, can the one black person in the building please come to reception and deal with this thing that we don't want to deal with? And it's just, it's just another way for them to, even if this is a black woman, like
yeah,
you said, this black woman could be, she could be anyone. Like she might even share the same views. I mean, there are black people who vote for Trump, for goodness sake. They're not someone I'd want to have dinner with. Like it's just not enough. And
yeah, it's just a thing of you could find a black person who believes in anything. Like, I could find one black person who believes slavery didn't happen. Like,
Kanye West.
like, do you get me? Like, it's ridiculous to be like, here's our one, because they are a person of color. Any criticism made on the company's anti-racism or lack thereof is defunct. Like, no,
Yeah.
I just, yeah,
And that's their
I,
problem. And they'll always continue to do stuff like that because, if they always just have that one black person on the board, they're always going to come across issues like this because it's not enough just to have one black person. And the sooner they get that into their heads, like the less they'll look as embarrassing as they do with these claims and responses.
yeah, and it's just very, it, just very indicative of these messages not necessarily sinking in. And I
Mm.
think what's maybe important to do as well, as much as we talk about all this, is talk about the people who are doing things right and are at least doing something. And
Yeah.
one of the things I wanted to specifically highlight was the Fringe of Color Films, which is going on currently throughout August. Which is so Fringe of Color was an initiative, or not initiative, a thing started in 2018. Started as a spreadsheet by Jess Bro. They made a spreadsheet of all the different like shows of people of color at the Fringe that they could find, and so just as a document for different people to use to look at and actually find people of color at the Fringe, because we've both been to the Fringe. It is
Mm.
not the most diverse festival.
No, it's not. Let's leave, let's leave that one there. But yes,
Yeah, we'll get to that later. Don't worry.
yeah,
Maybe that's for another podcast.
yeah.
But yeah, so then like in 2019, that moved on to like a ticket initiative. In 2020, this is now like its own little, well, not little, but its own kind of festival, filling that void, and actually like a platform which is its own thing to kind of highlight these specific films and voices. So it's people be like, no, no, okay, we're done with you institutions who don't actually care about us. We're making our own thing, and this is what it is,
Mm.
which I think is really laudable. And it's because it's like if these institutions aren't going to help us, then we can't rely on them, and we just have to do things. Like,
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things that I'm excited about as well because I, I like I said, I don't know what it is that's different this time when it comes to the whole like BLM movement. I don't know what it is that has shifted, but more and more people and spaces are being exposed for what they are. And I think a lot of people's response to that is to create or to boycott or to, just if you don't want me there, I'm not going to be there. I'm going to find my own space and I'm going to make it work for me. And that is the kind of stuff that I'm really excited to see
yeah,
moving forward.
for example, in publishing, which is Saskia, obviously your specialty,
Mhm.
is is there's this new publishing. I think there might be more than one new one, but the most recent one I've seen is like Hajar Press, which is
Mhm.
this new publishing house which is run by people of color and like has a specific goal of promoting people of color and publishing them in a way that in an equitable way, in a way that doesn't happen, because we can't get into this right now, but people of color in publishing are notoriously paid way less, especially in the UK. There was this
Yeah.
whole publishing paid me hashtag, and you saw how different the amount the paychecks given to white authors and non-white authors, and it was
Mhm.
really wild. Go look up publishing paid me for more details on that.
Yeah, the publishing industry is, I know we can't get into it properly now, but it is one of those industries that is so analog and just so behind on so many things, which is crazy because when you think of storytelling, you think of like, adventure, excitement, but then also there's the political side of things where it's forever looking forward. So to kind of be around all of that and not really take any of those like just those diverse like stories and experiences on board and apply them to your whole like business is just it's just a bit baffling to me. It has a long
Yeah,
way to go and I really don't have much hope for it, but we'll see. We'll
we will
see what
see.
happens. We'll
Saskia,
see.
maybe you can single-handedly change it.
Oh well,
Um,
you never know. All in a day's work.
and I think, yeah, another thing which has happened during lockdown is this show at the Royal, which is run by the Royal Court, produced by Toby Kimetarang, and there were a bunch of different performers in it. They did like these performances over Zoom, and it's called My White Best Friend and Other Letters Left Unsaid. And it tackled a lot of racial issues and had a lot of different people of different races in the show, and
Mhm.
is just like the sort of thing which is really important to have and to just be like, look at this incredible theatre that can be created when you let people tell their stories. Like,
Yes,
yeah,
that is definitely like the message to take away from that. I think just giving people free reign edition. When it comes to creating art and stuff, to me, that there's way, way, way too many politics involved that just really shouldn't be there. That just hinders people's like self-expression. So I love to see things like this where people just feel totally free to say their truth and make it beautiful.
yeah, exactly. So,
Um,
so
Before
go
we wrap up, Teo, I'd like because I think it would be good if we were to share some of the things that we've done in you know terms of supporting the movement? So is there one
Go
thing
on.
that like you've kind of seen or decided to adopt like since this, started up again?
Oh yeah, I mean, like something that we've changed in a
Yeah.
sense. Um, oh, this is going to be a very specific thing, like to my writing. But one specific thing is that, especially in the past month, and I guess it's not just to do with writing, but in a broader sense, is to the look at what things say in terms of their structure and their form, in the sense of, so for example, there are there we go. There's a film which I'm writing a review for right now, which in the dialogue and in the text of the film, it says it's ostensibly anti-racist, but the
Okay.
way it presents, the way like in the camera work and in the narrative structuring and all that stuff, the way that presents um its indigenous people is deeply racist.
Okay.
And so one thing I've probably come from away from recently is to look less, to not just look at the intent and what their stated intent is, and look at what the actual effect of a thing is, and look what the actual structure of a thing says about it. Because you can have 1,000 people who say they aren't racist and they still run a systemically racist institution.
Yeah.
Like even the Metropolitan Police, who by every metric, by every statistic, they're institutionally racist, will still come on TV and say we're not racist. Like I've learned to kind of move past looking at people's what they say and what their even if they have saying it in good faith, looking past what their intentions are necessarily, and looking at the actual content and substance of their actions. I think that's been a big thing for me,
I
and
think
I
it's
recommend people adopt.
definitely like I mean what actions, words, like they're kind of just they're all just things. There's all especially when it's a film or an institution, there's always going to be something that you can look at that goes beyond their outward appearance and how they want to come across. And you will find that thing that is actually how they do come across. And then that's what you should base your, decisions on. So I think that's a really good one.
So, what about you? What's your thing?
Mine, other than literally like making a mental note of everything that people say and using it to judge them later on.
Keep the receipts.
Keep the receipts exactly. Mine is not really anything to do with my work. It's more into where I spend my money. I actually wrote an article about this a couple of weeks ago on my blog about buying with a conscience, and I don't mean no offense to vegans and stuff, but I don't mean like not eating meat and buying clothes from like recycled clothing and stuff because I'm just really not that great of a person to adopt that. I admire everybody else who does, but it's just not me. But I mean like buying like I buy a lot of makeup. I think a lot of girls do, a lot of guys do these days as well. Um so it's not buying from brands who I don't know what it is about the makeup industry, but it's just it's a hot it perpetuates this like this ideal of how women should be, how women shouldn't be, and a lot of like young girls and everybody like they look up to that. So I'm boycotting makeup brands who it's just clear that they don't support dark skinned women and who only use them in campaigns for performative reasons and um they don't really care so much about the well-being of or movements like BLM, like the Estee Lauder company. I'm going to call them out. I've given up on. I don't know if you know anything about makeup, but MAC and kind
Yeah.
of Smashbox are very popular brands, and they have all like donated to the Trump administration. And so yeah, I've decided to boycott makeup brands that don't support black women. Yeah, that's where I've started. And it's a real shame as well because, like, I mean, no, it's not a shame at all, actually, because there are so many other makeup brands out there, and not even just makeup. Like, there are other businesses, there are other places that you can buy from who, you know, morally, they're just better. And when you
Yeah.
look, you find some really, like, awesome things. So just kind of looking a bit outside of myself and trying to spend my money on things and putting it where it actually matters.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
if people wanted to find you and kind of the stuff you've been writing about, talking about, your writing, any of that kind of stuff, where would they go?
They can find me on sincerelysaskia.com as well as VoiceMag
Yep.
UK.
And we'll add that in the show notes.
Yeah.
So if you want to talk to us at Voice about anything, it's at VoiceMag UK on Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to like see what the contributors are doing, what they're watching, all that sort of stuff, it's at voice.extra on Instagram. If you want to read the articles we're writing, see the interviews we're doing, stuff like that, it's voicemag.uk. And if you want to see the other podcast, which is a bunch of different interviews with artists, that's the Voice Mag podcast. And if you want, and please donate to Voice and support us with the links on our website for shows, stuff like that, and all that kind of thing. And please promote with your friends, tell your family, tell your enemies, tell a random person on the street. Why not? Share the love and all that. Thank you so much. And thank you for being with me, Saskia, today.
Thanks very much, Ted.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks to Kevin MacLeod for letting us use Shaving Mirror. You can find his stuff on incompetech.com.